Okay, let's dive in. Welcome to the deep dive. This is where we take the source material you've shared with us. It could be reports, studies, research, even your own notes, and we really try to unpack it together.
Yeah, pull out the important insights.
Exactly. The idea is to give you a kind of informed shortcut, to understanding some pretty complex topics.
And today, we're doing just that with a stack of sources on the experiences of Black and African American people in the U.S. We've got material looking at workforce stuff, healthcare, education, quite a bit on bias, and trauma as well.
Yeah, it's a wide range. So our mission here is to pull out those key findings from these different areas and connect the dots a bit across them.
Right, to hopefully give you a clearer, more informed picture of the complex realities that are documented in this material.
Okay, let's unpack this. So maybe we start with the workplace. One of your sources, a dissertation, I think, really focuses in on Black women's experiences.
Yeah, and one of the core ideas it highlights is this concept of double discrimination.
Right. Can you say a bit more about that?
Well, the research suggests Black women often face challenges that stem from both their gender and their race.
Okay.
But it's not just like additive,
Yeah.
not simply experiencing sexism and racism separately.
Okay.
The sources talk about intersectionality, general systems theory too, to kind of frame how these identities intersect. They combine to create this unique experience where challenges really get compounded.
So it's that combination, that interaction, that's key.
Exactly. That's what the research points to.
And when you look at the actual interviews cited in that dissertation, you kind of see how this plays out on a personal level. Participants mentioned feeling isolated, a loneliness described as just being Black, or feeling their opinions weren't valued as much as, say, their white colleagues.
Yeah, and navigating career hurdles that they felt were tied to race or gender, or sometimes, both at the same time. They generally reported higher levels of challenges compared to counterparts.
The research uses some specific terms too, right? Like double marginalization.
Yes, and intersectional invisibility. It also gets into specific negative stereotypes they faced. Things like being seen as sexually unrestrained, or maybe surprisingly, this stereotype of being like super resilient.
Which sounds positive, but it can kind of dismiss their actual struggles, right?
Exactly. And maybe the most stark finding in this particular source, 100% of the participants felt they hit a glass ceiling, or maybe more like a concrete ceiling.
Wow, 100%.
Yeah, and they linked that feeling to a lack of sponsorship, fewer opportunities, not enough mentorship.
That is striking. And the sources bring in other data too, like showing that over half, 54% of Black women in some organizations find themselves being the only Black woman in their whole department.
Which really underlines those feelings of isolation, right? That lack of belonging people mention.
Definitely. And it adds to what the sources call this emotional burden or emotional tax.
Tie it off into the pressure of tokenism too.
Right. So how did people cope? Did the sources mention that?
They did. Participants talked about different strategies. Things like praying, watching movies, sometimes drinking wine or alcohol, even using medicine.
Okay.
And there's also discussion of code switching. Adjusting how you act or look or speak.
Adapting for others' comfort, essentially.
Oh, yeah.
Or maybe to get opportunities.
Yeah, that's the idea presented. A strategy Black people, including the women in this study, often use to navigate certain spaces.
But the sources also point out that this comes at a cost, doesn't it?
Oh, definitely. A real cost mentioned in terms of health, increased stress over the long haul. The dissertation and some other sources too, they link this kind of ongoing discrimination to significant stress, racial trauma, and a whole range of negative health effects, even tragically premature loss of life in some contexts discussed.
So that's a heavy connection. Let's maybe broaden out from those individual experiences.
Yeah, and look at the kind of the deeper roots and mechanisms the sources discuss, like implicit bias.
Okay, right. One of the sources, a facilitator guide, I think, defines that pretty clearly.
It does. It explains them as these attitudes, these stereotypes that operate outside our conscious awareness, things we learn over time from all sorts of places.
And the key thing is you can hold these biases implicitly, even if you consciously reject the idea.
Exactly. And our brains, they like shortcuts, right? Energy saving. So they can fall into what that guide calls fast traps.
Fast traps?
Yeah, basically relying on these implicit biases. Quick, automatic thinking that happens, especially when we're, say, under time pressure or just mentally drained.
Right, makes sense. And the sources link this specifically to race and gender.
They document pretty strong automatic anti-Black biases, things like associating Black individuals with negative feelings or evaluations.
Okay.
And they mention that persistent historical stereotype linking Black Americans, especially men, with violence or criminality. Research suggests that link can be quite automatic for many people, actually, regardless of their own background.
And the sources also list out some of those specific historical stereotypes about African Americans, don't they? The ones that have been around in culture for a long time.
Yeah, they do. Tropes like the Sambo figure, the Mammy, the Jezebel, the Sapphire, or angry Black woman stereotype, the brute.
The submissive Tom figure.
Right, or the welfare queen stereotype from more recent history.
And there are others, too, about things like athleticism.
Yeah, like the idea of being a natural athlete, but maybe lacking intelligence, or just broader false ideas about intelligence itself.
Yeah, so the main point here from the sources is that these biases aren't, like, inherent, they're learned.
Exactly. Learned from birth, really, through exposure to media, family, culture, everything. And the sources really emphasize that just becoming aware that these biases exist is a huge first step in trying to reduce how much they affect our behavior. They mention research using tools like the implicit association test, the IAT. It apparently shows many Americans, regardless of their own race, show a pro-white anti-Black bias on that specific measure.
Okay, so these biases aren't just abstract ideas floating around. The sources show how they actually show up, how they manifest in real life, right?
Yeah, definitely. Let's look beyond the workplace now and see how these patterns appear in other areas covered in the material.
Like healthcare.
Exactly. The Urban Institute source, for example, involved interviews about healthcare experiences. And the findings really echo some of the themes we saw in the workplace stuff.
How so?
Well, Black and African American adults reported experiencing what they perceived as discrimination and unfair judgment from healthcare providers.
Okay. Any specific examples?
Yeah, things like getting less pain medication compared to white patients with similar conditions, or feeling like their symptoms were dismissed or ignored.
Which could lead to delayed diagnoses, I imagine.
Right, that was mentioned. The report does stress that actually measuring discrimination in healthcare is tricky. You need the right tools. But critically, it points out the need to recognize intersectionality here, too.
So not just looking at race in isolation.
No. Your sources emphasize that race, gender, maybe existing health conditions, they all intersect and shape a person's experience in ways that research really needs to capture.
Got it. Okay, what about education? There was an NCES report in the mix.
Yeah, and it's packed with data showing some persistent disparities. I mean, first, the demographics in schools are changing fewer white and Black kids as a percentage, more Hispanic and Asian kids over time, but those achievement gaps,
They're still there.
they're still significant, yeah. The report notes some narrowing in reading and math scores between the 90s and 2017 in certain grades, which is something, but persistent white-Black gaps are definitely still visible in the data.
Okay, and other differences?
Yeah, differences in high school completion rates are noted. College enrollment rates also vary by race and ethnicity. Asian young adults had the highest rates according to this data. And even within school, disparities show up in the kinds of courses kids take.
Like
Differences in, say, foreign language credits, fine arts credits, and significantly, disparities in who gets enrolled in advanced placement or international baccalaureate courses.
Okay.
And another big one, higher percentages of Black students getting out-of-school suspensions and expulsions compared to white students. That's despite overall retention rates, like being held back a grade, decreasing across the board.
So systemic differences in opportunity,
Right.
treatment, it's all showing up in the numbers.
Pretty clearly, yeah.
And these things obviously have economic consequences down the line. Did the sources touch on that?
They did. That same NCES report pointed out that Black full-time workers often earn less than white and Hispanic peers, even with similar levels of education. And the source on racial trauma brings up the negative economic impact of things like over-incarceration, how that affects families, communities, making it harder to achieve upward mobility, reach the middle class.
So it's all connected? These systemic issues just compound each other.
That seems to be the picture painted by the sources, yeah.
Which brings us nicely to the concept of trauma itself.
Right, because the sources explicitly link all this, the individual experiences, the systemic biases, the disparities in work, health, education, economics, they link it to trauma.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
The sources on racial trauma define it pretty much as the result of that cumulative effect of ongoing discrimination and racism.
Okay. And they also talk about historical trauma.
That's defined as trauma that gets transmitted like across generations within a community, stemming from past collective experiences, think slavery, systemic oppression.
Wow.
The sources look at this from a public health angle, suggesting these historical wounds can influence health and even survival strategies today.
And microaggressions lit in here too, right?
They do. The sources define those, citing folks like Chester and Pierce as these often subtle, maybe unintentional insults, dismissals, or invalidations that non-Black people might inflict on African Americans.
Subtle but cumulative. Exactly. And they mention research, work by Claude Steele, for instance, showing that just being primed with race or gender stereotypes can actually make African American women perform worse on academic tests.
That really shows how powerful these things can be, even unconsciously.
Totally. The sources note that even people with good intentions can act in biased ways without realizing it, especially in situations that are kind of ambiguous, like a job interview.
It's not always about overt hate, but the impact is still there.
Right. And the sources also briefly touch on xenophobia, another form of prejudice involving negative stereotypes, in this case often aimed at immigrants.
So, okay, pulling it all together, what we're seeing across these different sources is, well, a really complex picture.
Yeah, it starts with those specific challenges Black women face in the workplace because of their intersecting identities.
Then zooms out to the learned biases and stereotypes in society that feed into those challenges.
And then traces how those biases play out in real, measurable, systemic disparities across healthcare, education, economic outcomes.
Leading ultimately to the significant burden of racial and historical trauma.
That's a fair summary of the connections made across the material, yeah.
And just to reiterate, these aren't our opinions. These findings are drawn directly from the stack of materials you provided. It's a documented snapshot of these realities.
It's definitely a challenging set of insights to sit with, but important.
So, thinking about all this, what does it all mean for you, the listener? Given how deep these patterns of bias and these systemic issues seem to run, according to the sources.
Yeah, what's the role of our own individual awareness in trying to confront, maybe even dismantle some of these issues?
And how can understanding this history, the psychological roots of bias that the sources describe, how can that knowledge actually help inform efforts, collective efforts, to build more equitable systems, whether that's in work or health or education? Something to think about.